Welcome back to the Title Abstract, the podcast about the people, tools, and trends shaping the future of title. Title industry is changing fast from regulatory pressure and shifting joint venture rules to new technology, smarter sales strategies, and evolving customer expectations. We created this podcast as a place to break it all down candidly, practically, and with the people who are actually doing the work. And that's who we have here. We've got Jonathan Holfinger back. Thank you, Jonathan. You might recognize we're all wearing the same shirt, so we shot these 3 episodes on the same day, so forgive us. And John Dyer, he's doing everything title up in Cleveland. And then Rob Zwink, our local wizard here in Columbus, building a bunch of different tech stuff. And one of those things is Rozzy. So thank you, everybody. This is Justin Williams. I'm with Rozzy as well. Today, we are going to talk about joint ventures and title. Some folks love them, some folks hate them, but they're here. And I think we just want to get John and Jonathan's varying and maybe differing opinions, but, open-ended question, do you do joint ventures in your business? And if you have, how has that evolved over time? And maybe Jonathan, if you want to
Yeah, I'll give some
take the
background on that. I started my own title agency 20 years ago, and for 8 years I was independent, no joint ventures, didn't really quote unquote believe in it, didn't think I needed it. And then I merged my title company with another title company, and they had a joint venture. And that was my first exposure to it over a decade ago. And ultimately, kind of realized there was some value in that. And then within a few years, several of our existing real estate brokerage clients approached us saying they were getting solicited to join other joint ventures, and that they realized this is what the national brokerages are talking about. This is what they need to do, and they aren't making any money as a real estate broker, and they need to have their own title companies. So we sort of ended up having to create a couple different joint ventures that were, for lack of a better word, cannibalizing our existing business in order to keep them from leaving. So the concept of joint venture sort of evolved, and I think it's helpful to frame it that we sort of look at it as 3 different types of joint ventures can exist. You can have a closed model where it is one business to another business, right? Where maybe our title agency partners with a mortgage lender or a bank, and they own, their subsidiary company owns 49% of that. And ultimately, we just have this separate title company that is a true joint venture between the two, where nobody else can get in, nobody else is expected to get in, versus on the other end of the spectrum is an open joint venture, which a lot of title agencies have been doing in Ohio over the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, where they are selling membership in their LLCs like shares of stock. And they're basically saying, hey, real estate agent, we'll sell you interest in our company. You can become an owner of our company, a shareholder, so to speak, if you use us. And so there's been a lot of those that have popped up in all of our markets, Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati. And so we even see it even creeping into some of our smaller community offices as well. And that has driven us to have to do a little bit more on that side. And so we've actually had a shift where we've kind of had this hybrid model that came about over the last few years, where the brokerages want to have their own title company, but they realize that if they own the 49% and their top agents don't get a piece of that, those agents are going to be in a different joint venture. So they need to sort of sell shares within their joint venture to their top agents. And so you have kind of a limited sort of closed joint venture to one particular brokerage, but a lot of individual owners or individual agents can buy in, or teams can buy in as shareholders. And so we actually have all 3 types at Northwest. And I can tell you that I think the most successful operations are the open joint ventures. It's harder on closed joint ventures if there is any swoon in volume. And then also in the hybrid, sometimes the returns aren't good enough. The size isn't there. There's no economy of scale. And so, it just kind of depends on the market and how much volume you have to justify it. But ultimately, those in the title business have to make the choice of Do you want to use that as a sales tool to give up, 49% of the profits to return that to a pool of investors, or not? And over the last 5 to 7 years, we've realized, or at least I have personally, that if I want to continue to grow, and if we want to be, one of the biggest, or really all I care about is being the best title agency, then we're going to have to do those things. We're going to have joint ventures because that's what the marketplace requires if you want to keep growing. Now, that being said, in some of our smaller markets, being independent and not having any joint venture presence is really important too. And the quality of the title work and the quality of the service is what wins. And frankly, I love those offices. I love those communities. I do a lot of teaching in those. I've represented boards of realtors in those, and I really enjoy that better than I enjoy the joint ventures. But from a business perspective, for us, we've had to have both, and we've tried to make both work.
Yeah, Mr. Dyer, do you want to give your maybe intro on your background and how you got into title, and then what your thoughts are there?
So I got into title through a joint venture. I mean, I was a young attorney, mostly practicing in domestic relations and other types of litigation, and a high school buddy who was a very successful mortgage banker in greater Cleveland area. And he said, "Hey, let's set up a title company." And I said, "I don't know what that is." Eventually figured it out, opened up Competitive Title, which was a joint venture between myself and my partner who owned 49%. And his mortgage company fed us. And then he introduced me to a number of realtors, and that was in 2000. And then in 2003, a group of realtors from our main office that we did a lot of work in Shaker Heights, the Howard Hanna, at that time Smythe Kramer office, these realtors approached me and said, "We want to set up a pod, a joint venture with you." So I did that. And then after 12 months, the two biggest hitters in that group said, "We don't want to be with all these other guys. We want to have our own group, our own LLC, because we're, we're delivering the bulk of the orders, and these other people are coattailing us or gravy training us, whatever." And so then all of a sudden, from one title company, now I had three. And in '06, we shut them all down because the volume had dropped a little bit, and it was I wouldn't say it was overly complicated. It was overly complicated for me. And so we just pivoted into just competing on service. And that was, kind of tailed into the great financial crisis and all that. And things slowed down on the residential side. And then I then eventually sold my interest in that company and came to Nova Title, which is where I'm at now. And we are not a joint venture. So I own this company with a partner, and we do work for all kinds of different realtors and banks and credit unions and lawyers and law firms and things of that nature. But no one else owns shares but the partners. And so we compete on service and we compete on price, and that has worked for us. And so oftentimes I'll get a question from a good client who says, "Hey, I know we've talked about this before. Every month I get an offer to join this XYZ title. I really don't want to. Are you going to ever set up a pod or a joint venture?" And I always say that's not my model. I'm not interested in that. I understand you need to do what's best for you and your family. If that's what you need, that's fine. I'll still answer your calls on Sunday afternoon. I kind of gild the lily a little bit by saying stuff like that. You can still call me when you have a problem on a transaction on Saturday night, and I'll leave dinner and go out in the hallway and take your call and help you ferret through the issue or whatever the case is. And they laugh and they're like, "Okay, we're good." We have an office in the Worcester market where joint ventures just aren't a thing. The title rates are the same across the state, but the escrow and exam fees and ancillary fees are much lower there. So there's not as much meat on the bone, so to speak. And that's been a great market for us because, again, we compete on price and service. And so that's worked out well. That doesn't mean that someone from a regional or national or statewide company might come in and start offering money to people, but thus far that hasn't happened. I hope it doesn't, obviously. So, I tell our people every day we have to earn the business because someone is willing to pay almost every one of our customers to do work with them. So I've seen, joint venture kind of pro formas where, they're willing to give some percentage of ownership to somebody that does, like 5 deals a year. Like, how does that make sense? It doesn't make sense to me, but that's somebody's pro forma. So, I mean, we deal with them in the they are legal, they are proper, people run them properly. Probably like everything else in life, 90% are probably done completely properly, 10% are done improperly, and they screw it up for everybody else. There's very little oversight from the State Department of Insurance just because of a lack of investigatory manpower. And we feel like we're able to compete with the joint ventures because, we have an excellent customer experience, and most of the joint ventures also do have an excellent experience. But that's just our challenge every day. And I think the joint ventures that are really successful, they view it the exact same way. They say we have to provide excellent service every single day. If our mentality is you're a partner, so you owe us deals, that's not going to work. Because it's just not going to work. I mean, realtors are very demanding for their clients as they should be, and they want the best in class service. And if you don't provide that, no matter what kind of title company you have, you're not going to have deals. So
And maybe Jonathan, do you feel like, do you know if any of your realtor, joint venture folks are a part of multiple joint ventures? Are they
Yeah.
exclusive to you, or how does that?
No, no. I mean, you can't, at least to this point, really track that. There's no way to know if somebody is an owner in one of these joint ventures. So I guess I would start out by saying years ago, we knew that there were members of one of our open JVs that weren't setting as business, didn't want to sell back their units, and we couldn't make them, right? So it's not something that it's sort of legally you have to make them send you business if they're an owner. And that's where realtors learned that, and other title companies are sort of selling shares to realtors they've never done a closing with in order to get their business. And so realtors' mindsets have shifted over the last handful of years to where they know that if they are in the upper half of realtors in terms of volume, that they have people knocking on their door, or I should say emailing them or calling them, saying, hey, we want you to, we want to sell you on the cheap some interest in this company, and before you know it, I'll be sending you 10 times return what you paid for that. And so they're like, oh, really? Okay, cool. I'll send you one deal, and then they get that return, and then they don't keep sending all their business there. They think, oh, I can get this somewhere else too. So we have had conversations with real estate agents who tell us point blank, hey, I'm going to have as many joint venture interests as I can get because, nobody can stop me. So basically, we realize that service is still what matters. But if we give good service, not a high enough percentage of real estate agents would stay loyal to us in Cincinnati, Dayton, and Columbus. And so we have to be able to offer something like an affiliated business model for them to buy into if we want to prevent them from leaving because others are willing to sell it to them. But I also know that we have to win because if they also own shares in another company as well as ours, we can't make them give back that share legally. We could ask them to, but we have to be the type of business that they would prefer to do business with.
Yeah, Rob, maybe you can talk through how we created this infographic, but we did, I'm going to go ahead and share this here. We did some research into Franklin County where we are, into what we call real estate agent loyalty. And what you're seeing here is, there's around 3,400 real estate agents in Franklin County that have sold at least one property in the last 2 years. And if you look at low performers versus the high end of the market, we dug in a little bit deeper to understand of these 85 that have done over 20 transactions, how many have exclusive relationships with any one title agent versus the majority of them split their deals across at least four title companies. So, Rob, do you want to just technically, how did we get to this data here?
And one of the tenets of Rossi from its early days is a near obsession with data and effectively using data to give insights, specifically for title offices to leverage their own data to get insights. So when I think of the various places to get data as it relates to title. It's government, as well as real estate listings, and then title offices' own information. So in the case of this report, we pulled 2 years of information from the Franklin County Recorder's Office, and that was specifically deeds. And then we looked at the return address. So like most of the deeds that were recorded in Franklin County had returned this deed somewhere, and they were often title offices, if not the majority of the time. And then we have a within the Franklin County, the auditor makes available parcel details, so the deeds could be tied back to the parcels, which could be tied back to the addresses. And then we also have a database of listings that goes back 2+ years, like real estate listings. So we were able to go from the recorder to the auditor to the MLS listing, and then we could see the original listing agent, because they direct often where the closing happens, all the way through to the deed. And we went into it with an open mind just to see what kind of stories this information could tell, and through it we were able to create kind of a month-over-month view of agent loyalty. Especially things start to pop out, like the higher performing agents, but the agents with the higher number of transactions, kind of how they might transition from one title office to another on average over a month-to-month basis, which title offices kind of grow in total market share, and what are their sort of attributes, are they using high volume agents, low volume agents. Some of the information that I think we were able to glean from it is, it seems title offices who have the high number of agents were often like the higher performing. So the title offices that had few number of agents were likely joint ventures, and then they were kind of dependent on the volume that particular high performing agent was bringing to them. So you could kind of see them very volatile throughout the period we were observing. And then one other, I was thinking about how to ask this question, because I'm not a title agent, but I wondered, maybe for Jonathan and John, like when you think of the 4 large underwriters, and specifically the underwriters who have direct offices, do any of them specialize in joint ventures, as far as you know?
Yeah, so in our markets, there are national underwriters who have acquired companies that have joint ventures, and there are some national players who also do different types of joint ventures with commercial. And so it is a part of our competitive landscape. Not all of the underwriters, but some of them do have joint ventures themselves.
It did seem like one of the trends we saw was if you had a real estate agent that was selling a lot of houses, they might have 2 or 3 different title offices, and then they would always seem to, like, if they kept the momentum, they always sort of landed with one of the larger underwriters' direct offices. And I wasn't sure if that was like unique to Central Ohio, or if that was a part of a business model too, but it was interesting, an observation to see,
Yeah. I think obtaining some of this data has been hard over the years, so it's nice to be able to get real data. The only caveat I would add in there, and I know we've talked about this in the past, is the recording information isn't always accurate, right? So not all deeds say who the title company is, and sometimes the title company may have a joint venture and stamp it with the parent title company's name and not the joint venture's name, or they use a recording service company that did the search, and so then the title company's name may not be on there at all, and we've seen some, I guess, margin of error on those things. But it's nice to know that you can track it back to the listing agent, because that's really the key, is who is referring it to which agency.
Yeah, agreed. Like the Crown Search shows up as the #1 return to address, and then where
one of the proposals we use. And so if they do our recording, then their name goes on it. And a lot of times these reports, I've seen some underwriters do the same type of thing, where it's like, oh, I think more of those should have been under Northwest, but they were actually under Crown.
Yeah, I think normalizing the data. One nice thing, and maybe a plug for the Franklin County Recorder, is they were one of the few that used their system and index the return to address, where in other counties you have to like effectively analyze the stamp or look on the last page or try to find that, which is hard. And agreed. There is no way seemingly to create that attribution aside from like roll up one sleeves and do kind of the janitorial work of finding it. um,
Jonathan, how do you monitor or do you get reports for what percentage your joint venture partners are submitting either from the brokerage, or do you have like salespeople that service them, or how do you create a value proposition for your joint venture partners?
Okay, so if I'm going to unpack that question, I think you're saying, how, like if a business to business joint venture, or do you mean more of
The
a joint
open
venture?
joint venture. Yeah.
Yeah, with individual agents, I mean, our model historically has not been to solicit new business through a joint venture. It's been to offer membership to existing clients that we already have.
Okay. So
And
they
so,
grow into the
yeah,
select, if you will. Okay.
yeah. And so over the last year, I've tried to educate our sales staff on breaking that habit of not ever bringing it up, and instead saying, we have this, but we still like to create a relationship first, do business together, develop some trust. And if all goes well, if you like us and transactions are smooth, then we're happy to dig into a conversation about membership. And unfortunately, we've been rebuffed by many who said, I either A, already have a joint venture, or B, I don't like how that sounds. You either are going to offer it to me or not. And so it's been a strange sort of change of tone, because years ago it seemed, and I shouldn't say that, like a long time ago, like pre-COVID, it seemed like people really respected that, and that it was more special to be a member in a joint venture.
Yeah.
And now it feels like the attitudes have changed, and the agents are looking at it much more like they're entitled to own a title company.
Yeah.
That is the norm in some of our markets, which I just find odd, but it's the way things seem to be going.
There's some interesting components of it for us that we see. Like we have people that send us a lot of business that are in joint ventures, but they'll send us a complicated deal that they know that they believe that we'll be best able to handle. And so we handle it. And then they'll say, "Oh God, that was such a pain. We're going to give you some easy ones." So they'll direct us a little bit of extra business because as a thank you, essentially. And then other times they'll be frustrated with something that happened with the joint venture. Either there's delays and there's service issues or what have you. And one of the best things that happened for us during COVID was things got so busy and a lot of title companies just couldn't staff and they couldn't handle the additional work. So we got work from people that wouldn't historically use us because they just figured we could close it. And the people called me like, "Hey, if we send you X number of deals per month, can you close them?" Yes. And then we did. And then, I wouldn't say they got addicted, but they were like, they valued the service. So then they started pulling more. And we had one agent that just left a joint venture because it was worth more to her to not have to worry about title issues than to have to, basically be the title supervisor for her team essentially.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's still a competitive avenue for people that are not in the joint venture field. In my opinion. So, there's room for everybody, I think, and you can see just with what Jonathan described, there's a variety of options that people have. One thing I learned, we years ago in like, I don't know, 05, 06 or whatever, of my old title company, we had a couple different mortgage lenders where we're doing 20, 25, 30 refis a month. It was a big refi market. Now we do like that many in 6 months. And so we did a desk rental fee or marketing agreement or whatever. And we had it, there's ways to do it legally, and we did it all. And we had values placed by advertising people on us advertising through the website of a mortgage lender and this and that. And so we started paying them. We did a 12-month contract. And for both of them, almost immediately, their business fell off the table, just because of things unrelated to them. Rates went up, the market turned, whatever. And so we were stuck paying this money every month. And like 3 or 4 months in, on the second day of the month, I'd get a call, "Where's my check?" I'm like, "Have we ever not paid you? Like, what are we talking about here? Like, we're supposed to be partners. We're in this together. It's not working out. I know it. You know it. We're committed to doing it because that's legally what we have to do." And I learned, from my perspective, with a lot of people, once you inject money into the relationship, it's all about the money. And so when you're looking as an agent, if you're looking for a joint venture partner, you need to be very clear, because if there's always somebody that's going to offer a better deal, more money, a better pro forma. Maybe it'll perform, maybe it won't, but you don't want somebody that's going to leave your joint venture for another one because they offer more money, or
Yeah.
because they offer to give them a gas card or pay their marketing bill. And there's all kind of crazy stuff that goes on. There's lenders that buy Zillow leads for realtors for thousands of dollars a month, and all this stuff that is all kind of happening behind the screen, and it's just part of our industry. And so I mean, from our perspective, we're committed to competing on service. Does it cost us some business? Yes. Are there people that are just not into the whole joint venture thing and want to use a local business where they can call the owner, at any time, day or night, and get an answer? There are. And so that's what works for us. But the people who only are concerned about the money, they're doing a disservice to everyone, including their clients, which is unfortunate. But the clients will figure that out at some point.
The other thing about joint ventures that when I was first introduced to them, I sort of thought, well, if they're getting paid, we don't need to do as much with salespeople. We don't need to do as much with, whatever they want, marketing services, and they want, us to go to their office for the closing, and they want, free CE, and they want lunch and learns, and they want, all these extra things. Why do we have to do all of that? But unfortunately, that is the marketplace you're competing in, because the non-joint ventures are competing with those things. If you are a joint venture, you still have to have those things. So ultimately, on all of our joint ventures, we treat them no differently from a sales perspective, from a additional services perspective. Like recently, one of our business partners, we were just talking about the capture rate, and they're like, well, if we could get you to come in and do lunch and learns once a week for like the next couple months, maybe we'll get more FaceTime with certain agents, and maybe and it's like, okay, let's consider that. But the idea of doing the joint venture and giving up all those profits is supposed to be that the partners are driving business, but yet I found that doesn't really happen like you expect it to, and you end up having to do all of the same things you would do anyway. So if anyone is listening is considering a joint venture, be prepared for that on your pro formas. Expect your expenses to be just as high as they would be otherwise. So,
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, joint ventures down to like business development as a strategy, right? And we, not a plug, but we have this tool that I think both of you use called Hot Leads, where we track properties you previously closed, and theoretically, and what we have found is like people do value that you've got back title. You could maybe, some of our clients offer a discount on the fee schedule, different ways to get their first transaction with a realtor. And we've got a few companies that don't operate as a joint venture, but they're like good at winning business using this in the marketplace. And then we've got clients that, I get on, sales training calls with their sales reps, and I just, frankly, the objection handling that I'm hearing is like, I don't know how you have a job. And so I guess, what sort of strategies, maybe John, from a sales perspective, do you see like being successful competing in a heavy joint venture market, I guess?
So for us, I mean, we get a lot of looks at a lot of different realtors, so we get many opportunities to make a good first impression. So when we have a deal with a realtor that we've never done a deal with before, I personally and our escrow people try to like really communicate with that person. So, Daryl Turner has kind of written the book on title sales. And one of the easiest things to do in the simplest is just to proactively communicate with the realtor and keep them posted on what's going on. And now it couldn't be easier with texting. You can just text them, hey, everything's looking good on 123 Johnson Street. So we try to stay in touch with those people. I teach CE classes around the state, mostly in Northeastern Ohio and our Worcester market. That seems to help. We have great people that do a good job and make people feel good about their transactions, and we reflect positively on the realtors. One thing that I personally do is I do a lot of the closings, especially when a realtor calls and says, hey, could you meet the Johnsons? Could you meet the Smiths? I'll do it. And I can't do that all the time, but I do it whenever I'm available. And sometimes it's at night or on the weekend or whatever, and I'll do it because that's part of what I do. Um, and so that makes the realtor feel really good that they can tell their client, the president of the company, the owner of the company is going to come out and meet with you. That helps, enhance the status of the realtor to direct that. And sometimes things are complicated, um, and we're able to resolve that. And so for a lot of the clientele, getting on the phone with a lawyer is invaluable. So the challenge is how do you scale that, right? Because there's only me and one other attorney in the office right now. We've had up to four, now we have two, and so like that's really the challenge. So the for me, one of the biggest takeaways is, Jonathan at the beginning said we realized at some point, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, but to grow, this was the way to grow. And so we haven't really grown in the sense of we're like at a certain revenue level and we haven't been able to click through that. So that's a big challenge. So looking at other markets and acquisitions are things we're looking at to do that. Whether that's the right path, we'll find out. Um, so I mean, it's difficult when you're selling the same service and at one gas station they give you a free Cleveland Browns glasses and another they don't. So where are you going to go? Let's go to the one with the free stuff, right? And so that's the challenge we face. But
You know, new-ish into this real estate industry, and these topics of like NARS settlements come up, and like um, more direct listing platforms are getting listings. Do you ever see a world in the next 5 years where realtors are like less important in the transactions, or
I mean, trying to disintermediate all parties to a real estate transaction is like the holy grail of tech and how to do that and who's going to be the one that does it. I mean, there's so many different inputs. I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's all been out there forever. It's not like it's a new idea to use technology to facilitate real estate transactions. I mean, I saw that Open Door just fired their CEO because their stock's down at like $3, 390. I mean, it's not that easy to do.
I think too, there's an element in the psychology of people where they need comfort and trust. So a realtor provides comfort and trust, a person they can talk to, they can look up on social media, they can learn about. And so, John, you mentioned Rocket. I mean, that comes to mind. Like they've done a good job of creating some trust in the public marketplace, whereas new tech or other tech that doesn't have a name has no value to the average consumer. And so while there are certainly going to be early adopters in any tech space where you might get a certain percentage of people who are like, oh, this is awesome, I can automate everything, 80 to 90% of people won't want to do that. And so I don't see realtors, sort of getting automated out of the picture in any sense. Because, I mean, dealing with home buyers, they don't know anything. They don't understand it. They need somebody that's going to walk them through it. And ChatGPT is not going to be good enough for that. So I do think that there's this element of personal service in what we do that's just forever going to be there. And on top of that, there is an element that even ties into joint ventures about the difference between the cities and the non-cities, like the more rural counties in our state. And why joint ventures don't proliferate there is because it's really hard to do title work in those areas, because title is actually really complicated. So joint ventures can only flourish when you have refis or you have residential subdivision or condo sales, because those transactions are fairly simple. But when you have farmland and you have lot splits, and you have manufactured home conversions, and you have shared driveway access easements, and you have all these actual real title issues, the effort to do that cannot be centralized and cannot be done by somebody sitting in Columbus or Cincinnati in the same way that it's done by somebody who's actually in one of those counties where they see those transactions every day. And the realtor doesn't call or email, they walk into the office to talk about the complexity of a transaction. Yeah, I think kind of a final thought on that is just the idea of the title industry being the same or all of Ohio being the same is just so far from the truth, right?
Yeah.
Like I see the fundamental differences from one county to another, and then also from that metropolitan urban city environment, the expectations and the mindset of the agents and the lenders in those markets about what title means to them is very different than what it means in a small county seat 2 hours from a city. And so whether you're doing joint ventures or not, that concept of what is needed to win. And going back to your comment originally, Justin, about sales, what works in sales in Columbus and Cincinnati is a bit different than what works in Chillicothe and Portsmouth and St. Clairsville. And so a lot of the stuff John was talking about, providing that good service, being a lawyer, being available, teaching, I find that very helpful in those smaller markets. But in the cities, it's a lot more like, do you have a CRM? Are you, cold calling people? Are you, doing all of these extra things to really get in front of people and hammer people with, hey, we're here, we want your business, please try us, in a way that just feels different, and our success rates are different. So we have a number of salespeople, but their approaches are different depending on the size of the market they're in, because the nature of getting title business varies in those markets.
This has been the Title Abstract. If you enjoyed it, share it, spread the good news, send it to your underwriter, to your colleagues, to your friends, your family, and it's been another episode.